That money could instead be funding more soldiers.
What's the answer to the question?
And so the answer is we could be very powerful in the world. We'd just be powerful in a different way than we have.
Patrick Harvie.
I think the situation that Bridget has laid out has more opportunity than threat for us. If we want to move toward a situation where we recognise that our security, our well-being, not just here at home but around the world, is something collective, something about the relationships between people, between the economic and political justice that so many in the world are deprived of. That's the opportunity to move away from the bully boy tactics.
I can't allow
we have to punch above our weight.
I want to get everybody in quickly. Douglas Alexander.
It was Douglas Hurd, a former Conservative Foreign Secretary, who used that phrase 20 years ago. That's why I think it's so significant that we've seen such a diminution of British influence over the last 5 years. One of the fundamental disagreements between Philip and myself is I believe the European Union is a force multiplier for Britain in the world. We have a unique place as a member of the Commonwealth, a member of the G7, a member of the UN Security Council. We can be a highly influential country in the 21st century, but not with the weak leadership we're seeing today.
Exactly. All right, Foreign Secretary, we used to punch above our weight. Now we don't even get into the ring.
We still do. The truth is we are a significant power. We've got the 5th largest economy in the world. We've got the 5th largest defence budget in the world. We're one of the few countries that can field a divisional strength military force and sustain it. We are a member of the P5 on the Security Council.
All right.
But let me concede this. The world is changing. The world is changing. And we do support and should support countries like India playing a larger role in the international
But we shouldn't settle for second-class
like the UN
status,
Security Council. No, we should not.
All right,
Absolutely
let's
not.
move on now to Europe. William Dartmouth, in 2013 you wrote, "Come on, Mr Cameron, give us that referendum and do it fast. We can't afford to wait." In 2014, Douglas Carswell, he was then a Conservative MP, he's now a UKIP, he said, "We've got what we want," when Mr Cameron gave him and you that referendum. So why are you now the major roadblock to a referendum?
We aren't the roadblock to the referendum at all. If it hadn't been for UKIP, there wouldn't be any referendum or any promise of a referendum. And the fact of the matter is that Mr Cameron has broken his promise so many times, he's simply not credible on this issue.
But if people vote for you, they won't get a referendum.
Probably, and this perhaps anticipates something which may or may not happen at all. The fact of the matter is that what we're going to happen is we're going to have, just like Harold Wilson in 1975, remember him, I do, I think everybody else here probably does very much, we're going to have a phony negotiation followed by a loaded question, and that is what will happen.
All right. OK, what's the answer to that?
Well, it won't be a loaded question because the Electoral Commission will set the question.
Well, we don't trust the Electoral Commission at all.
It won't be a phony negotiation.
We've asked them to resign negotiations.
Well, let me answer the question. We're already engaged. I've visited 25 of the 27 other EU nation states to start talking to them about Britain's agenda for reform in the EU. We will have a substantive negotiation. It's clear to me...
And how many are supporting you?
Yeah, I was going to say, how many are supporting you?
It's clear to me that the great majority of them want Britain to remain in the European Union. Indeed,
because we're paying them lots of money, that's why.
Britain remaining in the European Union as being vital to the future of the European Union and do understand the agenda that we're promoting.
All right, but let me... You know, I know, everybody in this panel knows that the chances of a major repatriation of powers from Europe being negotiated by 2017 is close to zero.
I disagree
Why
with
not
that.
just
I disagree
admit
with
that?
If you talk to the new Vice President of the Commission, Frans Timmermans, he is already looking at a package of reform that involves doing things where they can be done best, where things can be done at national level, allowing them to be repatriated to national level, so that the big decisions can be taken in Brussels.
That would require some treaty change, wouldn't it?
Those decisions that are national level decisions can be made
That would
at
require
national
treaty
level.
change.
In due course, it very well
You're not going to
may be.
get that before 2017, Bridget.
The Germans already made it very clear from the very moment this was raised that they will not accept treaty changes. They worry there'd be a Pandora's box where all the other members of the EU would then want to change things according to what they want.
And the same with the French too, they don't want to.
How are you going to convince voters?
Depends which Germans you talk to. There are other Germans, like the finance minister, who say that treaty change will be essential to secure Germany's objectives around the governance of the Eurozone. So we believe that treaty change will have to happen, not just because of Britain's demands, but because of the German requirements around governance of the Eurozone. That gives us our opportunity.
Right. Douglas Alexander, we've had referendums on the voting system. We've had one on Scottish independence that may have not passed your attention. We've had one on whether London should have a mayor. We've had one on whether the North East should have an assembly. But you wouldn't give us a referendum, and you won't, on the much more important issue of whether Britain should stay in the EU or not. Why?
Well, we've said the right time to have that referendum is when there's a significant transfer of power from Britain to Brussels. We're not going to... Just let me finish the point. We're not going to succumb to the view that was set out by Philip, that on an arbitrary timetable by 2017, you will see a referendum. We're being very open with the British public about that. The right time for a referendum would be when there was a transfer of powers. I don't think anybody believes we're going to see that fundamental...
Why not just have an in-out? Why not resolve this issue for at least a generation?
Well, anybody who knows Scotland will appreciate that the issue of Scottish independence has not been entirely resolved by the referendum, so I think there's little credence in that argument to start with. Secondly, if you remember after the last referendum in 1975, incidentally delivered by a Labour government...
Which did resolve matters.
Only a few years later, the Labour Party, I think wrongly, but at the time argued for leaving the European Union. So the idea that UKIP is going to pack up its tent and go home after a referendum in 2017, I think is a little naive given the experience of Scotland at the moment.
Okay. Tim Farron, in 2008, Nick Clegg protested that we had, quote, been signed up to Europe by default. Two generations have never had their say. Now he says that talk of a referendum risks uncertainty that would have a chilling effect on jobs and growth. I mean, you're about as consistent on the referendum as you are on tuition fees.
No, 4 years ago, you will remember that Philip Allen and I walked through the same lobby in favour of the Euro Pact, which enshrined in law a referendum on in-out of the European Union at the point that it's triggered by an external factor, i.e. treaty change. That's an absolutely right and wise thing to do. I agree with Philip
But you used to be in favour of an in-out referendum.
I agree with on those terms. What I've always
not
felt.
just on treaty change.
No,
you used to be in favour of why won't they give people a real say in a real referendum? That was the Lib Dems in 2008.
No, on that basis, we've said it was about treaty change. I'm
sorry.
And that was about...
Excuse me, the Lib Dem document said only a real
about the Lisbon
referendum...
Treaty.
Hold on. Only a real referendum on Britain's membership of the EU will let the people decide our country's future. Labour don't want the people to have a say. You said there was no... let's have it after treaty change.
This is about the Lisbon Treaty back in 2008, and I indeed voted for a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty.
No, I'm sorry. You then went on to say the Conservatives only support a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty.
Which they did at the time.
You wanted a straight...
So they've changed their position. We've been consistent.
No, you wanted an in-out one.
No, and indeed, and that's what I said at the time, and I voted for a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty.
So you've changed.
And our policy has been since then and remains today, and was the Tory party policy until they got terrified of UKIP, that we should have a in-out referendum. At the point it is triggered by an external factor.
Why are you guys terrified of the electorate? Why not ask the electorate?
With every reason. Look at the European elections.
So the point is this. We believe there should be a referendum. The one thing you shouldn't do... William's position is very wrong, be damaging for Britain.
No, I can't accept that.
I'm about to say a nice thing about you, so be quiet. But at least it is truthful and honest and direct. The position that we shouldn't buy is the Conservative position, which is an arbitrary date picked in 2017. And the notion that we would somehow get any kind of reform that would be valuable to this country by setting this contrived date is nonsense. It's the equivalent of playing poker. It's the equivalent of playing poker and showing all of your cards to all the other players all the time. It is cretinous as a negotiating position.
No, you can't say that. It's
Frans Timmermans a friend of mine. He is not suggesting. I talked to Frans Timmermans. Frans Timmermans a friend of mine. I talk to him regularly. He's a good social democrat. The idea that Frans is telling you in private there will be fundamental treaty change, a redesign of the European Union by 2017. Could you look in that camera and just confirm that's what he says? That's not what he says.
What I have said is that he's got an agenda of reform, radical
treaty change
reform,
by 2017. Yes or no?
Of the European Union.
That's not
that
what
will
he
involve,
says. If that's the best you can do, Philip, no wonder people won't trust you in Europe.
Can I just suggest that a lot of this is very esoteric, and what really matters at the moment, I knock on doors, I've knocked on thousands this year, I would say a few dozen maybe have mentioned Europe, and hundreds more are bothered about the economy and jobs.
I understand that,
and
but we're
getting
here
out
to
of the recession.
debate foreign affairs.
Indeed,
let me come to the economy. You raised the economy, and this is to do with foreign affairs. If we'd listened to the Lib Dems, we'd listened to you, we'd have joined the euro. And that would have been one of the most disastrous foreign policy decisions this country should ever take. So why should we listen to you at all on foreign affairs?
A number of people like Ken Clarke, Tony Blair,
so
Lynn Campbell and others felt there should be a referendum on the euro. But today...
You wanted to join it.
We felt there should be a referendum. And I'm pretty sure, Andrew, we all know what the outcome would have been. And the point is this, though.
Paddy Ashdown, your leader, a compelling message has been made for what will shortly be the world's most powerful currency.
Shall we look forward and realise that
I'm looking back at your record so we can judge if you know what you're talking about.
3 million jobs depend upon our relationship with the European Union. Leaving it, or risking leaving it, would hugely damage our economy and our recovery. And rather than being bothered about constitutional navel-gazing, these guys do, let's instead encounter on
Let me bring in Patrick Harvie.
and working with our biggest trading partner.
All right, I know that. I was asking about the euro, which you conspicuously haven't answered.
Patrick
Harvie, let me ask you this. The English branch of the Greens want a referendum. The Scottish branch, which I think you represent, don't have a policy. And the party seems to have plenty of disagreement. I mean, you're just split on this issue, aren't you?
Well, we're not branches, we're different parties,
you know
part of the same political family. I've got no fear of a referendum. I don't
want one?
If the next UK Parliament, you know, let's say there's a good strong block of Greens, I don't think we would vote against having a referendum.
But do you want one?
I don't think it's the most urgent priority facing us, but if it's brought along, I will look forward to the opportunity to make the case for Europe. But I think to make a case across all European countries for a better kind of Europe. Look, right at the moment, these political parties are offering to hand over what should be democratically accountable power in Europe to the corporate interests through a trade deal with the US called TTIP. The TTIP deal will effectively hand over what should be democratically accountable power to corporate interests, making Europe even less democratic, even less accountable. That's not the kind of Europe that I want. I want to argue for one which is genuinely democratic, where the people of Europe have their interests
That's fine, but I just don't know if you want a referendum or not.
Yeah, I've got no fear of a referendum. Bring it on, I'd say.
I want to ask a question to William Dartmouth. The UKIP has worked hard to try and get this referendum on EU membership. If the re-election result is such that it takes place, it looks as though it's quite likely that Scotland and Wales, and maybe many in Northern Ireland, would vote to stay in. So isn't there a danger that by pushing for this EU referendum, UKIP would contribute to further fragmentation of the UK, that more Scottish voters would feel even more alienated by a decision taken in Westminster which didn't reflect what many of them wanted, and therefore you could hasten a UK...
Well, actually, Scottish voters seem to be alienated anyway, and either we're a unitary state or we're not. But I must just lightning say, on negotiating of the terms, Mr Juncker, the President of the Commission, said that free movement of people is a pillar of the European Union and cannot be changed. And that is on tape.
And Mr Carswell, Douglas Carswell, your Member of Parliament, said that he wants to see a European Union in which free movement of people remains. He's your most senior member.
Well, Mr Juncker, unfortunately, is a lot more influential on what terms are going to be offered to Britain than my esteemed colleague Douglas Carswell. And frankly, that is an irrelevant debating comment that does disservice to your office.
Free movement of capital without free movement of labour is just a recipe for even deeper exploitation of people in the labour market. If you believe in free trade, I think we should have fair trade, not necessarily free trade, but if you believe in free trade, why can you be against the idea that people are free to sell their labour wherever they choose to?
I point out that in the North American free trade area, one of the most successful free trade areas in the world, there's free movement of capital, goods and services, but there's not free movement of people.
Let's not take America as a model if we believe in a fair and equal society.
And I would also point out, and I must just put this into the thing for Mr Alexander and Mr Farron, which is they were both peddling this myth about the millions of jobs. That only works if your proposition is that all the trade would cease. So is your proposition that all trade would cease? And if it is your proposition, I would remind you that the amount of trade that takes place between the top 20 states who are not members of the European Union and the European Union is...
Excuse me, there's no point all talking at once. You've asked your question, let him answer it.
Let me answer. I think it makes no sense to shrink our domestic market from 500 million consumers to just 60 million consumers. Of course it would be possible to continue to trade. The question is, on what terms? Why would we want to give up the right, as Norway has given up the right, to set the terms of that huge single market of which we're part? And I would say that respectfully to Philip. Even Margaret Thatcher was determined that Britain always had a seat at the table when issues of the single market came up. That's why there is such dangerous nonsense talked by UKIP when it comes to the economic interests of working families across the country.
Well, I simply point out to you that we only have 8.24% of the weighted votes in the Council of Ministers.
We have
50.
0.24 could be very important.
8.24%. And
no votes, none at all.
also the British government, your government included, since 1996, tried to block 55 proposals put forward there, and they failed to block every single one of them.
Very well.
The fact is we don't have the influence.
But, Philip
and
Hammond,
you ought to know that. You do know that.
Excuse me, I'm going to ask another question. You've had your say.
Thank you.
Philip Hammond, if against your wishes you don't get anything like the repatriation of powers back to Westminster that you're hoping for, there will still be a referendum.
There will be a referendum. When we've completed